We have the honor to have presentation from Mārtiņš Āboliņš from Bank Citadele. He is chief economist. Hello, I apologize for those small technical problems. I am Mārtiņš Āboliņš. Thank you to Fiscal Discipline Council for invitation to participate in this discussion. My aim is not to look at the tax reform per se and whether it meets or does not meet some objectives that have been set. It seemed to me that my contribution to this, or the added value to this discussion, could be looking at the new indicators of companies, their perception and their mood. When we look at the economy in the country, we have to balance the interests of all groups, and it's a very extensive circles, and also entrepreneurs, businesses have certain opinion of what's going on. And we have some numbers to see the moods that the companies are in and what we should take into consideration. Very briefly, I will try to present the new results of our survey of Citadele, and we asked also the companies their opinion on tax reform. This was some time ago, but I believe that these would be still useful. And I will show you in general what's happening with the companies. We have we have been conducting this survey already for a number of years. We ask 8 questions, 6 months before and 6 months afterwards. And so we see, for example, some negative, below 50, above 50 positive. And so we cooperate with market research company Fiscal, and we use all the structures and methodology, so it's all fine. So this is Citadele index. What we see actually, we see that this spring the mood of the companies has greatly increased. Here we see historically, and it really correlates quite well with economic growth. In 2008, it indicated very clearly beginning of some problems. But here we see that the mood was below 50, more or less. But we were quite surprised at the end of the last year, when the mood was already, I would not say that we're depressed, but we saw indications of slight depression, like the first half of 2008. We got rather negative responses from companies. At the end of March and April, when conducted a new survey, we noticed that this mood has improved significantly. If we compare it to the previous quarter, we see that it is the second highest improvement what we've seen throughout 13 years. It happened only at the beginning of 2010, when the economy started getting out of recession and crisis. So indeed, this is a very significant outcome and result that we see. We had hoped to see it for some time already. Now let's take a look at the reasons why the mood of companies has improved so significantly. What we do in our survey, we put 8 questions. I believe they are listed here on the bottom of the slide. They are three blocks. One is assessment of general economic situation, what the companies and businesses think about what's happening in economy in their field. Then assessment of companies of their own finances, turnover, profit indicators, and number three, that would be future indicators, as I call it. What the entrepreneurs think about investments, and also what they are planning with respect to employees. Are they planning to employ or to dismiss? And we see that within a quarter, this block that we call general economic situation, this assessment has increased. This is rather subjective because an entrepreneur sees a very narrow part of the economy, his own field. And here, especially after sanctions against Russia in 2014, we saw that the assessment decreased. But now we see that the results have improved. And also in general, also with respect to investments, we see a positive line. A blue line slightly above 50, it remains more or less. Companies are planning to increase making investments and increasing the amount of investments. So improvement is very subjective, apparently. So these questions are subjective, actually. Now, if we look at the sectors, we split this into production, industry, trade, construction, and services. We see that in construction, the improvement is the fastest, and that's understandable. We know the cycle of EU funds. Last year was very bad for construction. This year, some kind of movement has started. The private sector has become more active, so very fast improvement in the mood among builders. However, we see that in industry and production and also in services, we see they are within the positive zone. Only trade is in the negative zone. They are still rather pessimistic. Perhaps this is linked to the fact that trade is the last one to feel changes. If anything is happening, you see that after some time in employment and then only after some time in trade. So this is the most pessimistic sector. This is the situation that we have. We also see quite an interesting picture if we look at the way how companies assess like 6 months before and 6 months in the future. So we have the future index and the past index. So this improvement is mainly expected from the future. The assessment of the last 6 months has improved a bit, but most of all we see higher expectations from the future. Of course, there are some certain seasonal effects also in this survey because people in general in spring are in a better mood. But it looks quite significant. So these are the general feelings about the economy aimed at the future. Now, breaking this into regions, we don't really have any specific stories here to tell. We see improvements in all regions and also in Latgale, even though it has constantly worse outlook compared to other regions. The best Zemgala and Pierīga. But they vacillate quite a lot. Another point which seems very interesting to me, we see in those latest trends what's happening with respect to size of companies. Here again we look at the same answers, but big, small companies, micro, medium size. We see that large companies, as to their mood, are in the best situation since 2007. Neither in 2011 or 2012 we saw this kind of answer. Medium, they are approximately on the level of 2010, 2011. Small companies, micro companies are still working in the zone of pessimism. And here I singled out those very small companies, micro companies up to 9 and 10, and the large up is 250. And here you see the differences. In the last 2 quarters, we hadn't seen that kind of difference comparing major companies and small micro companies. That's quite interesting to see. There is this trend that the difference is increasing on the level of perception. Large companies are more or less feel more or less comfortable. They are planning investments, planning employing new employees, and quite to the contrary among small micro companies. Perhaps, of course, this is also important to understand which companies export and which do not. Those exporting companies feel quite comfortable, but the local market is still in the negative zone. And again, the difference between those who are exporting and those who are in the local market, the difference is quite great. And also foreign capital. Foreign capital feels much better in Latvia compared to local capital. Perhaps it also correlates to the size of companies and export also activities. But it's very difficult to identify the first cause for this. So this is a situation that we see. So for the first time since 2014, index is in the positive territory. The general assessment of general economy is improving. And we see the greatest improvements in company, medium-sized production company close to Riga, in Riga region. So among these, we see greatest improvements in mood. But of course, Riga is still leading. So that would be about the general mood. Now, shortly about the following. We also put some additional questions, and this time we chose to ask questions about the offered tax reform. But here we have to take into consideration, we put the question at the end of March and beginning of April, so it's not reflecting the current debate. The first question, whether they heard about this reform at all. 82% had heard about this reform. The second question, what was the assessment of it? Very positive or rather positive, in fact, a half. Neutral or hard to say, 1/3. And those remaining negative or very negative. These are below 20%, less than every fifth. What I found interesting, those who haven't got a definite opinion, but still we see that the majority of companies believe that the tax reform is going to decrease shadow economy, grey economy. Only slightly about 10% think that this reform could go into the opposite direction and increase shadow economy. So I would say that we see a rather positive mood among companies. If we look at different cross-sections, according to sector, size of companies, according to regions, we see that the support or positive assessment is across the whole spectrum. The most supportive ones are major companies, about 250 employees. Very few believe that this could bring negative consequences. Smaller companies are slightly more cautious, but this is a spectrum. It's not that only companies from one sector or one size or one region. We see this attitude across the whole spectrum, supporting. And it's hard to say in this index, and it's not measurable, how much, to what extent this mood improved because of this declared tax reform. We know that many things go on in economy. But another thing which I also believe is very important, it's to understand that the last 3 to 4 years, probably 3 years in economy, have been rather strange, rather peculiar, because the economic growth was rather moderate, but the increase of salaries went faster. And from the point of view economy, it means that the gain from economic growth was felt by employees and the state, because we are taxing income and consumption. And so we see from micro data, this is flat or even downgoing. So the feelings perhaps are quite objective. why the companies for the last 3 years have felt rather pessimistic. And now during the first quarter, economic activity increased. And this is also improving the mood, and the European funds are coming in. So all these three factors sort of connected: reform and the situation in general, and also construction. This is very important for construction, that European funds are coming on. External environment. Our economy is small and open. We really depend upon external environment. And here we see a change of export in Baltics since 2014, and also global trade. We see that global trade due to China and resource prices have been negative in terms of dollar in the last half year. Very fast growth, and we see that also in Latvia. And in long-term, growth indicators correlate very closely with global economy. We cannot escape it in any way. And so we always have to put everything in this context of global economy, which is very important for us and for us to keep our place there. And just to conclude, this breakdown company profit and cost of labor. This somehow reflects our demographic trends. It's clearly that the number of young people is decreasing in labor market, so this pressure upon salaries is going to increase. And here we also see that if the global economy is fine, our export grows, but we have to understand that this is temporary. This cannot go on forever. And companies might have some problems whether we are able really to follow and to keep up with the global speed. So in the context of reforms, we should also think about losing our competitiveness. That could be beneficial to the state budget because the state budget is taxing consumption. But we have to think about what's beneficial in short term and what's beneficial in long term. So there is food for thought. And perhaps this can be later used in our discussion.
Thank you very much, Mārtiņš, for this very interesting analysis. Shall we ask questions later? I think we'll ask questions straight away. We'll begin with the questions. Mr. Kerr? Thank you for this interesting presentation. If I'm not mistaken, I've listened to it for the second time already. So I have had the time to consider the data you present. You show that the percentage in wages and profits compared to the base level has changed. Has it occurred to you to show this data differently, to compare the percentage from brutto profit for netto profit and for wages? If we look at wages, at salaries as a fraction from the overall, we see that we are below the European average. Then we see that the profit here compared to the wages is at a different fraction, but we approach the European average. We are on the way to it. There are processes of convergence in play, and we have to have greater returns. This is one of the points that comment from the floor about convergence. Yes, indeed, is the answer. It is convergence. The speed is very fast, and in the meantime, the global economy is doing well, and our exporters can take advantage of that, but we need to think of competitiveness long term. Thank you. A question from Mr. Austers. I have a question about the methodology. you have carried out a social survey. Did you call yourselves or did you outsource this? How did you carry out the survey? The survey is being organized in cooperation with the social research platform Escades, and we find enterprises in accordance with the structure of the GDP to represent different industries. And Citadele is not a state bank anymore, to echo your question. It's a privatized bank, so they are no longer a state bank. As regards the increase in wages, how long do you think the increase of wages will be a burden on competitiveness? I'm not sure I can give you a precise answer. I think that it will be highly dependent on the industries. The lower the wage in the industry, the faster the industry faces issues with that. The higher the average wage, if the wage in the industry is higher than the average wage in the country, the easier it is for them to overcome it, and they can be competitive once more. We have, for example, the textile industry, the clothing industry, which has one of the lowest wages, and they have struggled. They are limiting their operations in Latvia. They're leaving the country in order to optimize their production. But everything will be dependent on the industries. What do you think for the next 2 or 3 years? Will the wages stay at this level or will they increase? I think the average level will remain. There may be a deviation of 5–10%, and it can decelerate after 2020. A lot of things depend on the continued rate of migration. We know that the demographic downslope has only just reached the working age group. So we are only just beginning to feel the repercussions of the demographic downslide. Thank you. My question is about the slide called Wages Eat Profits. Is it something that can be said because the workers bring the profits? Maybe you can say participation in the profit. Yes, perhaps the slide title was a bit provocative. I'm not sure how we can discuss the distribution of profits and wages. It is not essential, I think, the title of the slide. The point is in the process. It's a phenomenon of our region. It is something that can be seen in Lithuania and Estonia as well, and it has been created issues. It has been creating pressure for companies. They have felt that, and we don't see any opportunities for this problem to go away. It's part of the major issues that we need to deal with. The impact of the demographic downslide on the economy and this problem as well. Thank you. Now I would like to ask a question. Going back to our main topic, public sector and sustainability. In your opinion, is the government getting taxes in an adequate manner? Is it an adequate level? Or should the level of public services be higher or perhaps lower compared to the taxes that we get? I think the representative of the European Commission has put it beautifully. Everything has to be strategy of the government. It has to be decided upon beforehand. It has to be conscious. It has to be a conscious choice of the government and of the society. What do we choose to do and how much do we choose to do? As for the efficiency, These are purely organizational matters. Are we being 100% efficient, or someone is succeeding in siphoning off something? I see an issue in something that has already been mentioned by the representative of the Commission. There are choices that are not conscious, but that arise from other choices. They are unforeseen side effects of some choices, and we need to deal with that. Thank you for your answer. Now we'll give the floor to Mr. Jānis Endziņš, representing the Latvian Chamber of Commerce and Industry. And Mr. Endziņš will give a few comments on their opinion about whether the government is doing enough, and what can we improve about the tax system, and how this impacts our overall sustainability. Thank you very much. Good afternoon. Where is the remote? I have found it. Now, just a few words about the Latvian Chamber of Commerce and Industry. It's the biggest chamber in Latvia. You see our members. The criterion is the number of employees. There's micro enterprises up to 5 employees, small enterprises 6 to 50, then 50 to 250, and then the biggest ones. So we have a different system from large European countries. And here you see that 70% are service companies. The turnover in 2014 was slightly more than 2 state budgets of Latvia. But I'm not here to talk about the chamber. I'm here to talk about the public sector and sustainability. And I will touch upon the following matters: the main challenges, the strategic choices that should be made, in our opinion, then the tasks and objectives, something that has to be done, and finally I will make a small summary of all my thesis. Challenges. Of course, the first challenge is the demographic situation. That's twofold issue. The first part concerns the balance and equilibrium between birth and mortality rates. Unfortunately, we are here in the negative balance. And the second is migration. There we have a negative trend as well. It's a problem for our country as a whole. And I think that in the context of today's discussion, we should think about the sustainability of the public sector, because the fewer people we have remaining here in the country, the costlier and the more superfluous the public sector becomes in its current composition. For a very poor family, a house with 6 rooms and small garden is something unsustainable. This is the same with our small country and a huge state apparatus. It is unsustainable. Here you see the overall demographic trends from 1990 to 2016. We have been on a steady decrease of the population for years. This is something that characterizes our country as a whole, and we need to think how soon we can stabilize the number of the population and how we can do it. During the war, Ukraine lost fewer people to migration than we have lost over the last years, and this is something that you need to think about. Here you see the numbers. If we split the numbers, we can calculate that every week a small village travels out of Latvia. This is a huge issue in regards to sustainability. And it's also a huge issue in regards to business, because the fewer people we have, the fewer workers we have, the fewer consumers we have, the smaller the market becomes. And people who work on the domestic market are in a constant state of crisis. They have never left the crisis. For exporters, there are different opportunities. The world is a big place, and they get out of the country and they work outside. But those who work on the domestic market are in a fundamental permanent crisis. Here you see the disadvantages propelled by our disequilibrium between the birth and mortality rates and the migration. The migration was also facilitated by the mobility opportunities provided by our accession to the European Union. The second major challenge concerns poverty. We need to solve the poverty issue. Someone can give me more precise figures, but the level of affluence in Latvia compared to the rest of Europe is about 74%, and the same applies for poverty. We are way below the suggested averages. We also need to deal with the matters of security. This is something that concerns our NATO expenditures. Of course, we need this insurance policy against foreign policy challenges. Trump said that you have to fulfill your obligations. Well, this is something that applies to all parts of the contract, of course, and if it applies to other parties, it applies to us as well. So we need to spend money on defense and security. The fourth issue is extremely important. We need to learn to live with our own resources. There has been only 1 year in the history of independent Latvia when we had a surplus. Only 1 year. And the rest of our independent history is only living in deficit. We need to learn to live within our means, because we cannot continue living at the expense of other EU countries. I don't remember who of the speakers said it, but the true independence is when you can pay your own bills. And that is true. Without that, your independence is relative. These are the major challenges that we would like to deal with. But what are the strategic options to tackle these challenges? We can talk about different strategic scenarios. Each and every one of those can be implemented if you have such a trivial thing as money. The demographic problem can also be solved with money. We've spoken about birth and mortality. You can stimulate births with money. We have the example of our northern neighbors, Estonians and other countries. If you invest money in birth rate, you can get births. You just need money. The second problem, poverty. Same thing. If you have money, you can help, you can sponsor, you can give aid, you can improve people's level of life. And the third issue, security, is also dealt with money. You just channel the funding from the budget, you have the money, you solve the issue problem, there's stability. So the solution for all these problems is money. But there is a strategic question here. Where do you get this money? We can take loans, and we have done it for years and years, for 6 years in the very recent past. We've been taking and taking these loans, and this is not sustainable. We cannot keep doing that. Every year, we pay huge sums in interest rates, and we pay back the debt, it's a huge amount of money for Latvia. We cannot keep borrowing money. We cannot take out these loans. It is not sustainable. There's a different vector, a different possible solution to where we get the money. And this is something that dominates the recommendations of the World Bank that have been quoted. I am very glad that these recommendations of the World Bank were rejected. Because the second strategy to get money is to squeeze the lemon. It means squeezing even more from the existing resources. And this, in our opinion, is not sustainable either. Because the fraction of entrepreneurs is rather small, the capitalization level is rather small, the activity level is rather small, and the lemon is not that big. You cannot keep squeezing it, you cannot get enough from this lemon. And this means that we have the third vector, the third opportunity to get money. It was recommended by the Chamber of Industry of Commerce and the Latvian Confederation of Employers. This strategy involves two steps. You need to carry out the top priority in the Latvian plan for strategic development, that's achieving a breakthrough in the economy. And we need to achieve this breakthrough by basing our economy on two priority axes, productivity and export. This is something that was written in the plan for national development. There were 12 different directions with incomprehensible subdirections, but this murky wording of the document is quite understandable, because it was said that you have to achieve a breakthrough and everything was just drowned in words. But we need to understand that we need this breakthrough, and we need to have a small and efficient public governance sector. These are the two things that we need. Everything is simple. These two things, an economy based on exports and productivity, subsequently a breakthrough, and this is against a background of efficient, small, compact public governance. This gives you money, and you spend this money on demographics, poverty combating, and ensuring security. We, as an organization of entrepreneurs, have raised this issue, and we've agreed on the 9th of August of 2016 in a meeting with the Prime Minister that we need to perform a strategic assessment and have exporting productive companies that can pay more than 1,000 euro net tax. Then people will come back and work here if they get this. Right now we have the 860 euro average wage in the country, which compared to the European average is frustrating. It means that people get a net wage of 500 euros. Of course they leave. Of course they are unhappy because they know that with this kind of wage they'll get very small retirement funds. They have no opportunities. They have no hopes for stable retirement. Of course they leave. So we need to have more companies that can pay good wages. The implementation of the solidarity tax was a great initiative, in my opinion, but it was the biggest stupidity that could have been done, because if you look at the fiscal position, if we look at the data from last year, people who had paid solidarity tax, the decrease in wages was 64 million. This means that about 26 million were unpaid. So this means that overall, through these calculations, the government did not get any additional money. It was just a redistribution through solidarity tax. So it was seemingly a great thing, but in practice it was not, because you were not getting anything from it. And burden on productivity as a result of these different tax policies is 3 times bigger in Latvia than, say, in Lithuania. So what do we do to make sure that companies don't leave Latvia and relocate to Lithuania? It's impossible with this kind of atmosphere, with this kind of fiscal landscape. So we implement the solidarity tax, we get very little effect, and we sabotage the local fiscal landscape and entrepreneurial landscape.
Now about objectives. Here I understand that I sort of do not fit into the context of other speakers, but the things to be done. Definitely the tax system needs to be reformed. Of course, we can go on living the way we live, we can lose as many people every day as we do, but we can change something. And one thing is reform of taxation system. Of course, taxation system is not the only solution in this situation. However, it is very important. And I believe that this Citadele index and the studies that were discussed, also the mood of the companies, they seem to be very positive. But probably this means that entrepreneurs finally see that government is planning to do something. For 5 to 6 years or even more, we tried to achieve to get the government of Latvia to put on paper a taxation policy strategy. It's better to go on living in muddy waters. Whenever the budgeting period comes, something is taken out of the drawer and put on the table. New taxes again. And that was just crazy. The head of one public shareholder company said, "My investors keep thinking that I'm hiding something from them. We have coordinated our profit objectives for the coming year. We define the return of equity. The shareholders vote for the budget in September, and in January I send them some message that we are unable to do this because the government has introduced a couple of new measures, and the shareholders tell me that could not be possible, but that's the reality." And when we talk about tax reform, one of the basic principles that should be put into the tax reform, and which is in there, is regional competitiveness as a minimum. As a minimum on the scale of the Baltic states, that is Latvia and Estonia and Lithuania, that with respect to labor tax, to company tax, and we are in a worse situation compared to our Baltic neighbors. That's one consideration. The next point. We also have to look at a number of items, not only in the context of the Baltic states, but we have to expand it. We should put it also in the context of Poland and some other countries. For example, excise tax. For a big truck, it's not a problem to decide in which country to fuel up. It's just a rational choice. Another point, the tax strategy should be based upon correct motivation. Correct motivation to start a business, to invest in development, and the average capitalization level in Latvian companies and Estonian companies differ approximately twice. If I'm not mistaken, representatives from the Commission also said the more investment into development, the better is the future that we can hope for. And we really have dramatically low investments of private companies. And if this goes on, we cannot expect anything better. The companies just won't be able to pay good salaries. The added value is not sufficiently high to pay a good salary. And so it's very important to motivate, to stimulate investments into development, also to motivate coming out of the shadow zone, of the gray zone. And also we have to attract investors, and this is definitely linked to the competitiveness factor. The third moment, this system, also from the point of view of costs, should be sufficiently cheap, I would say, both from the point of paying the taxes and from collecting the taxes in the public sector. This is interconnected. We can establish a tax system which is so complicated in administration that we spend more resources in administering the system than we are able to collect. Point number 4, of course, is decreasing shadow economy. And here you see on the slide, of course, the situation is improving, but comparatively, this grey or shadow economy is rather high. And finally, taxation strategy is pointless if it's going to change within a year. So predictability is important. This strategy should be approved, and then we should stick to it. Otherwise, it's just pointless. What a tax consultant can say about Latvia's taxation system today is the following. Today you see this snapshot. God only knows what kind of snapshot we are getting tomorrow. A decision was, for example, taken to decrease personal income tax by every year. Somehow this is not done. The decision was revoked. Then the solidarity tax was invented. Then something else. Predictability is very low. And to gain investors' trust, you need 4 years, so that a tax consultant could say you can rely upon Latvia. When we were at the very center, at the very core of crisis, of recession, the government of that time, Mr. Dombrovskis and Mr. Wilkes, agreed upon predictable tax system, and this was retained throughout those years, and that led to improvements. Later on, well, things got unpredictable. Now about the tools. Tools for increasing export and productivity. To put it very simply, so we have to do everything to make our products better, such that we can sell for better money. We have to have better processes, better sales, and better business environment, including better taxation policy. And there are a number of things that are required for this, both in the public sector and also in the sector of companies themselves. For example, for companies themselves, it's very important to improve cooperation. The third block, that's reform in public governance, in public administration. And this was this point of having small but effective public administration. And again, a couple of things that we have now agreed, have reached an agreement with the Prime Minister. We need a flexible motivation system for heads in, and also other employers in public administration. It's not normal that for half a year we have been able to find the head of State Revenue Service or insolvency administration. Many people decline because remuneration is insufficient. This is not normal. And another point, we should give greater discretion to heads of institutions so that they could try to retain better employees and the weaker ones could be dismissed. Now what the public administration is doing, they just train students, and when this person has reached sufficient quality, they move on to private sector. I believe there's Murphy's Law, Murphy's Law that states, if you want the team to show better results in high jumping, then it's better to find one who is able to jump 2 meters than 5 who can jump over 40 centimeters. So you sometimes have to keep this in mind when you think about public administration. We could use the best models of meritocracy and find the best leaders, perhaps from the private sector. And the next point, and in the next stage, we shall be working more on this. We should start assessing strategies of institutions. What are the key performance indicators for their work? so that we would move in a very targeted way to concrete results. And here, many institutions, institutions which are linked to business and other institutions have different nuances. For example, if a traffic police officer had been told that he is responsible for a certain part of the road, and he would be responsible for decreasing traffic accidents, would it be wiser for him just to sit somewhere in the bushes and catch those who are speeding, jumping out? Or whether it would be better to be very visible in his car before the very dangerous turn in the road? But I believe that our police officers are still sitting in the bushes and jumping out to catch those speeding, but they are not warning. I believe that we have many situations where we could act totally different to get better results. And now I haven't got slides on it, but it was discussed already. That's the dimension of expenditure. The number of inhabitants is decreasing, but the infrastructure and the employees are retained. And definitely in public sector, many things could be done differently in a more rational way to save resources. And to sum it all up, if we want to solve this huge hole in demographics, if we have to deal with poverty and security, we believe that it would be correct to focus upon exportable and productive economy and growth of such economy. And we should also implement well-considered reforms in public administration so that we would have small and effective public administration. But the most important thing is we have to do the utmost, everything that's possible, to have the average salary about 1,000 euros net. Before we achieve this, well, the story will continue to be sad. Thank you for this very interesting presentation. Now we have time for questions. So, I work in the banking sector. The previous slide on, well, of course, it's very hard not to agree that we have to have export-based production, and probably everyone is supporting this. But with respect to tax reform, we are talking about squeezed out lemon. We are concentrating upon the existing taxpayers and we are reallocating the money. What I would like to see here, we should also have the third direction, and that would be attracting new taxpayers to Latvia. This means both natural persons and legal persons. By using very targeted tools, we could attract new taxpayers that would generate additional revenue and would somehow decrease this pressure upon squeezed-out lemon. If we look at Italy, for example, natural persons, prosperous persons, well, now are offered some motivating tools. Other countries are attracting guest workers. And again, these are very targeted incentives. Also for legal persons, again, we see very targeted measures. And also financial solutions intended to attract new taxpayers. And I don't see this in the proposed tax reform. Also, we have been talking about using possibilities of Brexit. Such possibilities develop in Lithuania, for example, but in Latvia we lack incentives. I would call also your chamber to talk more about this in your conversations with the government, that we should promote influx of new investors. Mr. Pimenos, perhaps questions. Well, coming back to that squeezed-out lemon, are you thinking about squeezing out the company or squeezing the shareholders? I'll try to answer both questions or to respond to Mr. Austers. Jāni, you pointed out to the fourth direction that we have to learn how to live within our means. Are you thinking about the governments, the companies, or society in general, living within your means? Well, one by one now. The first comment that we should attract additional investors. Well, I had as much time as I was given for this presentation. This line of is definitely important. I have put on this slide correct motivation also to come to Latvia. But I believe that it is also very important to link such investors who are coming with products of high added value, not just anyone, but those who are able to create something, and financial sector is an excellent example. It already has one of the highest added values. And I think still a lot can be done. So I really support your comment, your view. The second question was about the squeezing of the lemon. Whether that was, by this we were meaning shareholders or the company in general. Well, it's all very close. The basic idea is, and what I wanted to say is that we shouldn't try to squeeze out of the existing companies even more, but first of all, to have more companies. That would be number one. And number two, to make this company more productive, able to export, so the company would grow naturally, and by this it would bring more money into the state budget. And the existing tax offer is changing. These comments by the gentleman cannot be heard. He's not using the microphone. He's not speaking into the microphone. A very important point. Shareholders of large companies, also companies that belong to the state. So, the shareholders. In fact, they are outside this tax reform blow, so to say. They are not affected. I understand your intention and the way you are thinking, that we should not harm companies. We should let companies develop. And yet, a company and the shareholders, these are two different persons. These are two different taxes. So, how we saved the shareholders, or how we transferred the tax burden to the shareholders? Well, once again, the basic axis in our position is that we need breakout in economy, but not just looking around whom we could deprive of what. Currently, tax reform envisages that at the time when I take out dividends, I have to pay 20% tax. That's what put into the tax policy. Mr. Osser had a question about living, about the ability to pay for one's own expenditure, living within one's own means. Actually, this is a question to all of us. We each individually, a natural person, should also learn to do this. Probably bankers won't let me lie. You cannot, as a natural person cannot live for 25 years by constantly going to the bank and taking money. At some point, you have to pay it back. So individually, we have to be able to live within our means. And with respect to companies, that's self-evident. If a company is unable to do that, it will just cease to exist. And as regards the state, if we now are paying 300 million euros in interest rates, that's a huge amount of finances for Latvia. This means that we should try to repay as fast as possible. And I hope that by implementing tax reform, we will arrive in a situation where we will be able to live with a surplus. But this is a political matter. Every year, the tax amount increases, but also the appetite keeps growing. And we eat up lots of it, and we invest very little. Unfortunately, that is the case. But then we pay this interest rate, and it's quite high, 300 million if we had this money, and that would be a lot. Thank you. Let's leave other questions for the part of discussion, which we shall have after the last presentation. And now we give the floor to Ms. Liepiņa, and that's the perspective of trade unions upon this set of questions, whether the government is doing sufficiently. The companies tell us that perhaps we could wait for some time. We need, first of all, economic breakthrough, and then we'll have the money for paying salaries to healthcare workers, to teachers, and also to fight poverty. Demographics and those who are not earning, currently we won't have resources for them before we get the breakthrough. So the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, Irēna Liepiņa, Deputy Chairperson of the Latvian Union of Trade Unions. Thank you very much for these presentations. They are very topical. We know that a large part of society has been already feeling like a squeezed lemon. We know that Latvia is the fourth poorest country in the EU. Quite frequently, when we listen to the opinions of the employers, we have to agree that these matters are important, and yet they postpone the solution of the employees' problems. They say, have patience, we will handle the issue. Unfortunately, this strategy does not give results. You have to invest more in people. And the trade unions are frequently called the problem stirrers, but they are in fact the solution, because money has to be redistributed fairly, in particular in regards to the public sector, so that you can ensure its sustainability. A few words about the Latvian Union of Free Trade Unions. We are the biggest NGO in Latvia, with representatives of 20 different industries and sectors. We have a lot of members, and we have been working for many years. I agree with Mr. Endziņš that we need an economy based on productivity and exports, but it also needs to be oriented towards the interests of the majority of population. And the trade unions stand for the fact that the best way to achieve this 1,000 euro net wage is general agreement, negotiations, agreements on wages that are not postponed but are solved here and now. Because postponing is not something that can be done, including with the sustainability of the public sector. I think we can all agree that we can't keep postponing, because we see migration, we see the population aging, we see automatization, we see digitalization, we see all these risks impacting the workers, impacting the population at large. So we need to make sure that we protect social interests at a larger scale. A few words about the trade unions. Here you see the data on the Latvian Union of Free Trade Unions. The number of members over 63 is noteworthy, so we know how the older population lives as well. There are many colleagues from Western European countries who have achieved solvency. How was this done? 100 years ago, every Western European country was just involved in the negotiations and initial discussions about what should be done. And only thanks to the conditional and continuous commitment from the trade unions, productivity was achieved and cooperation was achieved. Why isn't there an interest in exporting towards poor countries? Because people don't have the capacity to consume In order to achieve this capacity, you have to have general agreements, you have to have continuous work in order to balance the interests of workers and employers. This is why we don't agree that wages eat profits. This is just an allocation of the profit that is justly given to wages. This research was published recently on the 31st of May about the sustainable development. And this is not just about the public sector, but we know that the public sector is also related to the overall working climate and safe working conditions that have to be on the agenda of every company aiming to be sustainable. Coming back to trends in Latvia, we have already seen the statistics for previous years, and our previous speakers have said something that I can only repeat. The unemployment rate is decreasing, but 42% of the population still get the 450 euro wage. How can we aim at 100 euro net? What do? General agreement is the only way to achieve that, in the opinion of the trade unions, because we want to see this equilibrium and make sure that the public sector is sustainable as well, because 5 billion euro go away from the state budget. They exist in the shadow economy. Why? Because we are in the sector of low wages. This is one of the impediments. We have to find a common solution. How do we do that? We can work better. We can do better. We can do it not at once, but progressively. We can see the data on different professions, top qualified and mid-range qualified, distribution depending on the age groups. And we see that 32.46% of the employed persons in Latvia are working in the public sector. 300,000 people have emigrated from our country looking for better life. Out of those who are left, 1/3 are in the public sector. I won't delay and go straight to the recommendations. We have talked about efficiency and productivity and public governance. All this has been summarized, and the trade unions insist on investments in the public sector and in the private sector. The public sector is a sort of example for the private sector, especially in the fight against the shadow economy. The trade unions had a seminar a while back, and the efficient tools for combating trade in shadow economy were discussed, but then unfortunately we had the crisis, and it set us back until 2012. There are still sectors where the wages have not gone back up to the pre-crisis rate. If they were set back 30%, then they bounce back by 15%, so they are still below the pre-crisis levels. And the first step is to get them back. So the requirements made to the employers are not without any foundation. They are quite just. And in cooperation with the Latvian Confederation of Employers, the trade unions would like to stimulate the desire to ensure the sustainability of the public sector and improve the trust levels. If the public sector and the private sector, the employers, work in the interests of the workers, then there is trust, because you see that the work is appreciated. A fair pay is something that implies full taxes. You don't pay your wages in parts or in envelopes or withholding something. A fair wage is a fair wage. A general agreement is something that can ensure that, and there can also be tax reductions. For example, tax discount for catering, and Maxima, for example, is a company from our Lithuanian neighbors, but they are the biggest private employer in our country, and they can look at their example, look at growth, and analyze why aren't we represented in Estonia and Lithuania as much as Estonian and Lithuanian companies are represented in our country. We have some achievements. For example, the Sustainability Index Award was awarded in 2017, and some companies got the Platinum category, like CESO Alus, because they received the Social Dialogue Prize from the Latvian Union of Free Trade Unions. This was awarded to them since they were really paying attention to general agreements and social interests. This is one of the steps that we can support. There have been negotiations on general agreements in 5 industries in order to determine minimum standards in these industries. This is something that has to be done. The deadline is 2021 in order to establish minimum wage, so that all companies share this minimum standards for the industry, for social security, employment forms, minimum wages. There is one large company, the second biggest employer in the world, and the form of employment is self-employed. So how much money goes to the budget? How much would you gain from a general agreement? On a global level, this has been achieved. There's an agreement with the global union, but with the industry, no. And we need to stimulate greater responsibility towards the most important resource, the person, because the person, he or she, are the ones who create the added value, including the artificial intelligence. So we need to protect these minds and these hands so that they stay and work in Latvia, and they stay motivated to work in Latvia. This requires more general agreements and collective bargaining so that we can achieve a fair wage. These general agreement in 5 major industries, transport, chemistry and pharmacy, communications and construction, are extremely important. They are the 5 industries where we are planning the general agreements. The general agreements would cover the 24% of the market, which is significant as regards the level of social security of population as a result. What would be the impact? It would give guarantees to the workers, the ones who work and make money. This is not a welfare generation. This is support to the workers. And this is why this is a very fair, just, intellectual tool, smart tool that would motivate people and would be an advantage to the employers and employees. We should work on collective bargaining and general agreements collectively, because this is a major task for both trade unions and employers, so that we would be able to have such a coverage of general agreements as in Scandinavia, 70%, in Austria and Slovenia it's almost 100%. This is the kind of coverage that we should aim for, and we would be proud of one day, because this is something that would help us solve the matters at hand faster and make sure that we go beyond these discussions about education and security, because we would create an equilibrium between the people's needs and the capacity to pay, the solvency and the rentability. We understand that people put the development of the company first and profits first, but the trade unions invite you to put the employee first, because they are the first step. They are the ones who ensure the general profit for the country and for the company. And the solutions that we propose. The amount of general agreements should be increased, which should arrive at 5 general agreements by 2021. A social dialogue between free trade unions and the public sector, the government, should be continued in order to improve the social situation of the workers. Thank you very much. Thank you for this very interesting presentation. Putting together the last two presentations, we arrive at the conclusion that the productive and export-capable economy sustained by a small, complex public governance sector and general agreements would be a key solution to all problems. Now we have questions from the audience. Thank you. I have participated in several different discussions on economic growth, and this is the first time that I've heard a presentation from the trade unions. It's been very interesting. Thank you very much. How are you seeing the public sector? Because I think you are under the impression that the public governance is too expansive, and the number of officials is too large as well. This is not something that we can answer in general. We are under impression, based on the last statistics, that the number of medical professionals is insufficient, so we need to look at specific industries. Overall, if you ask about officials, about the bureaucracy, yes, the number of these public sector workers is too large. My question is about your opinion on the proposal that if there are specific criteria that are met, then the pay level can be different. How does the Free Trade Union think about that? The implementation of transparent criteria for pay is something that we support, but the level of income needs to be predictable. Well, I'm referring to Mr. Endziņš. If the changes in the wages are met fast enough, then there is a specific implementation. So if there are criteria that are met, including in cooperation with the free trade unions, then they are more motivated to work better. This is something that should be examined. If a person has education competences, then there shouldn't be a great deviation in the level of income. The wage should be comparable to the investments in the human capital. More questions? If there are no more questions, maybe I can ask another question. What is your experience with micro enterprises? Are micro enterprises entering in general agreement, and how are the interests of workers protected in micro enterprises? Because we have some issues. Can micro enterprises really boost the exports, and how important are they? The tax for micro enterprise was introduced in 2008, and yes, it created a certain gap in the social budget, but we have to look into who is the payer of this micro tax. If there's a beginner entrepreneur, then it's something that should be supported. If this is a large company that just wants to optimize its operations, then this is not something that should be supported. And without a doubt, micro taxpayers are very specific. There were even attempts to define the industries where microtax could be paid. There can be some similarities with startup model. This can be the take-off platform. But we need to understand that there are countries that live without microtax, for example, Estonia. We have to look at it from the position of public interest. And what do trade unions think of the rights of the workers in micro enterprises? Because we are beginning to lack workers in major enterprises. For example, Rimi and other big employers are looking for workers, and these people who could work in these companies like Rimi are working in micro enterprises, and they're more comfortable because they pay different taxes. So what is the balance between overall economic advantage and personal advantage? People should have social guarantees regardless of their form of enterprise, and people should have trust and understanding because they need to pay in order to guarantee the social services in the future, their retirement funds and other matters. Of course, the microtax led to retirement payment of €40, which leads you to important considerations. Is this a sustainable solution, or is it a temporary solution? Is it temporary support, initial jump of platform? In the context of social guarantees, we need to understand that they too can fall under general agreements so that people feel more protected. Why do people want to be micro taxpayers and not employed in a different company? Frequently, this has to do with wages. I would like to continue.
To continue, we know that very small shops work in this regime in microtax. I know that in the countryside, I talked to mayor of Valka. He said that they had problems with some of those small shops, and also Narbesen kiosks often use micro company regime. And the question is the following: what is better? That the person decides to become a cashier at Maxima, or he has his own Narbesen kiosk in Riga? Well, if the person has entrepreneur spirit and sees it in him to keep this small shop, then we should support it. This is the best form of employment. And I believe that some of them could be also our members of the trade union. But we know that sometimes people have the wish, but not all people can be small companies, micro companies. And there's a study that shows that leaders or managers could be 5 to 10%, and others would be employers. But we would want to have all those workers, even if they pay micro company tax, they should be socially protected and they should pay taxes. And so this is an open issue, and you cannot just give a simple answer to this. Thank you for this. Now we will have a very brief, very disciplined 15 minutes coffee break so that we reconvene for the final part of our